Hello and welcome to Design Education Talks from the New Art School. Our guest today is Jan Kubasiewicz. Welcome, Jan.
Welcome. Thank you for your invitation.
It's a real pleasure to have you here. So tell us about your new work.
Well, I'm an artist. I'm designer, design educator, curator. I'm professor emeritus at the Massachusetts College of Art and Design in Boston. MassArt, as we call it, is the first independent public college of art and design in the US. And it's still the only independent state-supported college of art and design in the nation. And we are very proud of it. In 2000, here at MassArt, I founded the Dynamic Media Institute master's program that I chaired for 15 years. It's currently chaired by one of my former students. Many alumni of the program are design educators at many universities in the US, Canada, China, Korea. As a visiting professor, I lectured and conducted workshops and seminars at many prestigious universities in the US, Europe, Asia, and Australia. I authored or edited a few books. I contributed numerous papers and articles to international publications and conferences. As an artist, I had more than 15 solo exhibitions on 3 continents. As curator, I curated more than 20 exhibitions. And since 2016, I've been affiliated with the Minda de Gunzburg Center for European Studies at Harvard University, where I serve as curator of its gallery. I think it's enough for an introduction.
That's amazing. So you began your education in Poland and then shaped design education in the US. How did this intellectual climate of the Polish Academy shape your understanding of design?
Right. It's not only the climate, it's also the time. I started teaching very early and by accident, like many design educators. I started college in 1968, so a long time ago. It was at my hometown.
Yes, I've been to Łódź. It's a beautiful city. Yes, absolutely.
Thank you. At the time, the program was six-year continuous curriculum toward master's degree. There was no bachelor's degree at the time. So during my last 2 years of college, I was already a successful freelancer, poster designer. As an exhibiting artist, I was showing my paintings, my printmaking. What shaped me, and this is directly the answer to your question, is that at the time there was no distinction between design and art.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, it's interesting that I tried to transplant that idea in the context of American education, in which design and art are sort of like 2 different domains. So when we start talking, if you would like me to go deeper later to describe the philosophy of Dynamic Media Institute, which I created in 2000, so you will see those connections. And at the time, 2 years before my graduation, the academy hired a new professor because the design department, or it was called Department of Graphics, expanded, and they hired a professor who was an amazing guy with charisma of internationally known designer. And his name was Chris Lenk, and he became my mentor. He became my friend, my best friend, till the day he died of cancer a few years ago. And enrolling in his studio as a student in 1972, I had no idea that it would be one of my most important decisions of my life, because Chris Lenk, soon after, a year after, he offered me my first teaching job, full-time teaching job, the lowest rank, but full-time teaching job. And what was amazing that he admitted himself that he does not know how to teach because he was a designer. And he invited me, which was unusual at the academia settings, to contribute as today we would use the terminology of prototyping and user experience. I was this user who he wanted to create a program for, and he approached design education as a design problem solving. And I was shocked that he allowed me to be a part of that experimentation. This dialogue was nonstop. We spent hours, maybe thousands of hours of quarreling, discussing, but experimenting with other students. He was able to create an environment of completely different situation within typical academy with the leader, with the master who everybody is working for. And you have to remember that it was way before the Iron Curtain was really difficult. But that marked me for life. That realization that pedagogy and design education is as creative as anything else. It's not only here the glamorous artist and designer, and here's a teacher.
Yeah.
No, this is a creativity which is a two-way street, and it's as creative as anything else can be.
Absolutely. This is essential. So looking back, which ideas or figures from your early education guide your teaching?
Did you say figure?
Which people, which people or any important people that guide you still, like your mentor.
Yeah, so I have to put him as number one because, as I said, this friendship and mentorship lasted the entire life of mine, and probably he considered me his best friend as well. So he moved to the U.S. He started teaching in RISD in Providence. So I took over the studio in which and did it for a few years. But then he invited me to teach a summer school at RISD. And then there was an opportunity to teach a semester as a sabbatical replacement. So that's a typical American story. I came to teach one semester. I stayed to teach the lifetime. So that's one of the instrumental people during that time was Tom Ockersey, who was the department chair at RISD. Great designer, very knowledgeable, teacher. He created a prestigious graduate program at RISD based on visual semiology and semiotics. So that kind of thinking about teaching design was aligned with my previous inspirations, obviously the Bauhaus, but also the old school, the continuation of the Bauhaus after World War II, which actually introduced the term visual communication. I never liked the graphic design term. Communication design is probably more appropriate, especially in today's technological context. Tom Ockersey, we spent hours discussing various aspects. He suggested, and that's why my American life started, that I apply for a position which was opened at the Hartford Art School at the University of Hartford in Connecticut, like an hour drive from Providence. And I applied and got accepted. I stayed there around 8 years. I built a program from scratch, graphic design program from scratch. I got tenured. I went for my sabbatical, and I said, well, I have something else. And I moved to Boston to MassArt, which was entirely different setup, different big, large large community of amazing artists and designers. And the environment was of that kind that they appreciated where I was coming from. Not only a designer, but artist, a historian. I was putting a lot of history into my teaching. I already mentioned Bauhaus, Ulm, but this is not the only sources. Before the podcast, we talked about Black Mountain College, which, by the way, has, of course, connection to Bauhaus because the Gropius and Breuer designed that campus. So that it shaped my philosophy of design, which I had an opportunity to to implement at MassArt. At MassArt, I met another mentor and good friend, Professor Al Gowan, who was a historian, designer and historian. When I came to MassArt, he was the director of graduate program, and he challenged me to redesign it for the new technological environment. Please remember, 2000.
Of course, I remember well.
A completely new world for design and art. It's not only the technology of internet and all the innovations, technological innovation, but how that was changing, radically changing the design field as well as the design education. Again, I was lucky because it doesn't happen in the academic structure that someone gives you full freedom to develop, to do the self-study and to redevelop the graduate program. And that I took this opportunity. And after a year of self-study, together with graduate students, I created a team of graduate students, sort of similar as Professor Chris Lang used me to create that program. I used my graduate students to think about what is at the core of that moment of time, which was different than anything else. And that's I have to share with you a personal reflection. Because of the date I started my education, and current moment, 2026, it's a span of 3/4 of a century. And it's not only that I was observing the history of design happening at the time. And history of design is clearly connected to the history of technology of communication. You know, when I entered the college, our printing office was producing books and publications in what today is called a LED lab. And it's like a super highly art technology of relief printing. That was a technology of printing. So in a sense, I feel myself as a time capsule. But it gives me this, in my opinion, unique way of seeing things which are coming and going, to see the cycle of technological change and a cycle of hopes and disappointments it brings.
Of course.
So that was the moment that in 2000, when I created Dynamic Media Institute, it was a response to what was happening at the time with communication technology and communication design, where things became more dynamic, that design was less focused on the object, static object, but more of a process and choreography. So that moment was different. But I wanted to do that thing. We spoke at the beginning of our conversation, how to make sure that the Dynamic Media Institute is really a multidisciplinary place, as it used to be, that art and design, and it was together. How can one accomplish that? We all know that departmentalization of academia is a drag. It's so difficult, logistically even, to connect curricula of Department of Social Science and Department of Sculpture. It's just difficult. So the idea at DMI, Dynamic Media Institute, was that we were inviting not only designers to the table, everybody could come, musicians, journalists, artists, of course, but also other technologists, people who also noticed that something is radically changing, that we start living a different life in different places, online. Part of it. At the time, it was not as radical as today, but there was no social media yet. But when you list what happened in the first 15 years of the 20th century, it's scary. It's like from ActionScript to processing to Google was invented, Skype, PlayStation, iPhone, iPad. The list is amazing. That was the elements, the gadgets were profoundly changing how we live our lives. Therefore, how we design for life, and therefore how we educate designers. So all of that became a sort of very dynamic system. So the cohort of each and every year of DMI was a combination of different walks of life. I strongly believe, and always still believe, that the best things happen on the borderlines of disciplines. Not in the core, but in the dialogue, difficult dialogue between people who very often speak different dialects.
Absolutely.
A musician has to communicate with an architect at some point. And the Dynamic Media Institute, in my intention, was supposed to be such a place. And again, I got lucky. I had a very good cohorts for a few years. It was not only different disciplines represented, but different countries, different continents, people speaking literally different languages. But the most important thing is how they communicated in order to understand the happening of the big change happening in the world. I was actually very often accused of sort of being out of control in inviting all those different people to one place, to one room, and for the dialogue. It worked because one thing has to be accepted by a person entering the Dynamic Media Institute, the understanding that we all are working on intentional communication. Intentional communication as a verifying platform of what we do. I believe that communication is this aspect of design existing in each and every discipline of design. Buildings communicate their function. Objects communicate how we use them, and so on and so forth. So communication, communicable knowledge, was the term we used as this verifying platform of what we do. If anybody, journalists, architects, or musicians, can agree to that communication is essential for our work, that person was welcome to the family of DMI. And then all other things started, because if we had such a multidisciplinary cohort, the program became multidisciplinary as well. I actually used the term anti-disciplinary. I said, this is not only cross-disciplinary, this is anti-disciplinary. And again, I was accused about too much of frivolity in my curriculum, which I disagree. I think this is a very important point. But there was another one. You as a design educator, you will appreciate that. Another aspect was important. How to make sure that the program grows, even if its chair, myself, doesn't control everything, right? So how to make it happen that the students the research, the practice, the whole environment is working on their behalf, not on my behalf, they do not fulfill my ideas. They bring their ideas. And that was another amazing element of recruitment. In the US, graduate school is usually when the young professional decides to return to school to retool their intellectual tools or to change the profession or to change the focus. So they sort of bring with them some of the professional experience, sometimes quite long, like 10 years in the field, and they are unhappy with something. They notice something they would like to change, and they bring that idea to the graduate program. So here's another element which created a great environment, that it was students who were bringing every year new researchable questions to the program, and the program responded. And when I looked back, I published 2 books on that topic. Every 5 years we published a book about research and practice of design at DMI. In those books, we can observe how from the enthusiasm to new apps, we changed to the 3D environment, to user experience. It goes together with what the world goes, what the professional domain, how the professional domain are changing. And that was something very important in the process of changing the focus of curriculum. It changed itself by people bringing new questions to it. So I use that metaphor, listening post, that DMI is a listening post, that you bring your questions and we will work. Together we'll work on those questions. It worked for many years. It's still a lot of, currently, for example, I noticed, I'm not involved anymore, but that modus operandi is still in place. And I noticed that currently it's more artists driving the curriculum than designers.
Okay.
Which I'm very happy, because it keeps me back to my original.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. You are talking about the essence of experimental curriculum.
Right, exactly. That's thank you for noticing that. As I said, it's a very creative endeavor to be able to help people. I don't want to be too cute, but there's an amazing space between not knowing and knowing.
Yes, exactly.
Absolutely. There's this amazing moment of discovery. And as you know, we as educators, we can help that moment to happen, but we cannot complete that moment for an individual. It has to happen in an individual.
Yes.
And that's why it has to be experimental. It has to be experimenting during the process, observing. And that's the process of design. The practice of design is the research. That was one of my most successful, if I may say so, papers I published 12 years ago or something. It was entitled "Design and Practice is Design Research."
Yes.
And it was sort of accomplishing what I did at the DMI, that, through rigorous practice of design, you achieve the moment that this is the research into new. And that's the practice which is reflective, which is intellectually rigorous, and it produces communicable knowledge.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. You're absolutely right. This is the key, what many don't understand coming from theory.
Exactly.
And it causes all the friction in design education. It causes all the challenges.
Exactly. Research by practitioners is called action research. And
yes.
Sometimes it's sort of considered a second second tier of research, which is not true. Medicine is action research. Law is action research. And design is action research. We build prototypes. We put it in front of our users, and we observe what happened, and we build and rebuild. So this iterative process is all what makes design process different. As you notice, I'm not using the term design thinking because I don't like design thinking.
Yes.
Instead, I use design process
Yes.
because design process is unique. It is unique. That's the beauty of it. And I strongly believe that when the practice or praxis, which is slightly different, but again, pointing to action, to changing. So the practice, if it's properly organized, it can become a rigorous research into whatever it takes. So experimental curriculum, yes, this is what kept me going for so long, because each time I never taught classes, project. Yes, maybe some projects. I have my favorite project. Like every design educator has favorite projects, but each class with the same headings was a different class. Absolutely, because we have to observe the cohort, the students coming to your classroom are each time create a different dynamic. That creative process of dialogue, just dialogic environment, needs to be taken into consideration. I love that, and my students responded well to that. So this is what kept me going for such a long time. There's another argument for teaching as the creative endeavor, which is sometimes not discussed among researchers and educators. I found it, it's not my idea. I found it in so-called Boyer's model of education. Ernst Boyer was an educator, and he distinguished 4 kinds of scholarship. And it was not specifically designed, but it worked very nicely with design education. So the first scholarship he calls discovery. Obviously, this is a traditional focus of research. We discover new knowledge. We are working toward new knowledge. Indeed, design requires both discovery of what we don't know yet with the conception of knowledge, what does not yet exist.
Yeah.
Generally, designers are speculative thinkers who create things which do not exist yet. But it's a big responsibility, which I hope we will discuss it later, because not only fun here, it's a lot of other aspects. So the second Boyer's point is integration. And I like it too, because integration fits design perfectly. Indeed, design is this environment where then it takes experiences from other disciplines and integrates it to the design process. And as an outcome, we have a new innovative thinking. Then it's this process of application, scholarship of application, Boyer says. Application is the second name of design, isn't it?
Yeah.
And finally, Boyer says in his model that there is a scholarship of teaching, which is very often sort of relegated from the serious design, serious research. I disagree. I think Boyer is right. Teaching, the building curricula, is as creative, as research-driven as everything else. And in design, we wouldn't have such a successful designers today if that scholarship of teaching was not good enough to readjust curricula of design education to fit the current new technologies and incoming things. So I really think that this model fits perfectly my philosophy of what experimental curriculum or experimental pedagogy is.
Yeah, absolutely. Did you ever come across Bruce Archer's work? Bruce Archer.
Yes, of course.
Yes, of course.
Communicable knowledge is not my term. It's Bruce Archer.
Yes, of course. That's why I asked about. I mean, if he had succeeded of having design as the third area of knowledge in general education, we would have solved many problems. Because right now we can only go to humanities and to sciences, and design doesn't fit in any of those.
Right.
So we need,
Right.
I think that somebody needs to really pick up that work again and say, look, we are actually the ones that create the knowledge in a way. And we need to have a third area of knowledge, because we don't fit in humanities and we don't fit in science.
Feeling lost in the noise of social media? Inspo cuts through the clutter, connecting you directly with real insights from real experts and industry leaders. It's a new social network dedicated to knowledge sharing, industry insights, and thought leadership. Get the latest from top minds in your field, or build your own thought leadership portfolio on Inspo. Already trusted by thousands of professionals worldwide, be part of the conversation and download Inspo Experts today on the App Store or visit www.inspo.expert.
Right. And that is challenging, isn't it?
But necessary.
We are thinking about future designers, right? As educators, we have to think about future designers. Designers come to our programs for the same reason as previous generation of designers. They want to change the world for a better place. I know it's a little bit simplistic, but it is the mission. It is the idea. However, the methodology of working, the appreciation of that kind of research, it doesn't have a good enough press outside of our discipline, which I believe there was a moment, design thinking, the career of that term, it was interesting for a moment. For a moment, everybody was looking for design thinking, especially business, right? They wanted to incorporate design processes because they were creative in order to make more money, which is nothing wrong. The design is in that at that service. However, it was like many times, it was not long-term thinking about the contribution of design into society. It was sort of finding a quick solution. What we can do,
absolutely.
What can we steal from design in order to make a better business? I don't think it's that simple. I think that design research, design practice needs to be understood by science, needs to be understood by economy and business, and thoroughly studied. Only cherry picking up some ideas and saying, oh, now we know we don't need design anymore.
But very few are doing reflexive research, very few. And we're not applying the findings enough. We're not applying enough. This is what I find. We need to apply and then see what happens. But we're not applying. People are just researching for the sake of researching.
Right.
So you've coined and developed the idea of motion literacy. Tell us about that.
Well, that's a. Thank you for asking this question. First of all, it was one of the core ideas of Dynamic Media Institute. We had four core concepts addressing through the entire curriculum of Dynamic Media Institute. One was information, in which communication and information representation, data visualization. That was the part related to information. That was the time and motion. That was this new component of design which came to designers or landed from space on the designer's desk because of technology. I remember first software packages for animation, for interaction design, and it opened new possibilities for designers. So we started thinking about how motion, specifically, because motion is the structure is structured on timeline, right? Something is moving from place to place during certain time. And so one of the researchable questions at the DMI was how motion can contribute to communication, obviously, because communication was our. And we came to the conclusion, and I wrote about it in multiple papers, that motion is a language. Motion is a language. And again, in order to understand that, we needed to go outside of design. And where did we find that? We found it in music. And I'll tell you why. Because, motion of a body, of a musician, precedes the sound that musician is producing, which is a part of musical experience. So there's a motion learned, practiced, in order to make sure that this sound is intentional, and it's translate the musical score into musical experience. And then if we scale it up, we see the orchestra, in which multiple musicians are instructed by an expert language of motion, which the conductor applies in order to create a musical experience of the orchestra. So there's this one musician, which, by the way, does not produce any sound, but uses the language of gesture, language of motion, which is an expert language. Only musicians know that. But it can create the experience of music for millions of people, for thousands of people in an auditorium, and millions of people through the technology. Observing that and looking into other examples, how Sergei Eisenstein, the Russian avant-garde director, used the motion as the component. And yes, he was the first one in his analytical tools. In his book Film Form, he used the analysis of his movie Alexander Nevsky, and he said there's 5 elements of it, and one of was the diagram of motion. He was designing motion on screen, how the camera moved in order to create motion on the screen, and that was, of course, perfectly synchronized with other components, including music. So starting observing that, we came to the conclusion that it has to happen. We need to study it. We need to include that in our different domains of communication design. First, of course, was dynamic typography, kinetic typography, where the type can move in order to enhance the meaning. Of course, it degenerated to some unnecessary elements, which I did a paper on that too. It was sarcastically entitled "Type on Wheels," and it was a critical view on the programs which used those amazing, exploding typography in order to express words. That's not that funny, but type and type. Motion of type can be used differently for different audiences, have a meaning. Like in our interface today, there's some motion that icons identify that there is something wrong with the application or something like that. So we started using that, and then it brings us immediately into narrative, because narrative, as motion, as music, is the structure on the timeline with a beginning, middle, and end.
Yeah.
And even if it is interactive, even if there is a choice of path for the user, at the end of the day, there is a linear interactive that user walked. That is also the motion. It's a different kind of motion, which is a transition from not knowing to knowing through the choices of the user. So there is a lot of levels of motion, not to mention that there is a physical motion, which is present in everyday life, in every moment of our existence. That's why I always say that those who think theoretically, like astrophysicists and theoretical physicists, are the greatest conceptual artists in the world.
Wow. So how do you teach students to balance clarity with ambiguity within that? Because I'm also very interested in the fact that, because it's so seemingly easy to create motion, which of course is not, but there's also what students today don't understand, that you can have motion from stillness, something that good designers are very good at creating. But that's another. It's all this All these are wonderful things you're talking about. These questions are coming to my mind.
Right. Of course, there's always about balance of motion and static elements. That's another beautiful in-between space. My personal work in photography is connected to, I was very much inspired by chronophotography of the 19th century. And chronophotographers, and myself today, and many other photographers, inherently explore the space between motion and static image. That space is beautiful. But let me go back to your question. Yes, there are different levels of design education. We probably should start design education earlier than we do it today.
Of course.
Why not in high school? Why not in the kindergarten? I don't know. Maybe kindergarten.
Well, the work of Freud is only taught in MIT, but he designed it for kindergarten anyway.
Exactly, and there's probably more design education in kindergarten than in high school. That's interesting too. So there's a different level, but I really think that, and I know that I'm jumping into the big issues now, but it's important. Each level of education requires us educators and designers and our students to understand that the design is never morally neutral. Okay? That by the gesture of design, we are contributing to the society. And that's why I wanted immediately after your question to bring the seriousness of our profession. It bothers me, the arrogance of designers, that they often think that they can solve all the problems of the world and on budget. This is not true. It's not such a simple thing. Designers need to know that there is a responsibility in the process of design about many different things. I'm not even talking about such things like Buchanan's wicked problems, which is a very simple idea. The wicked problems are not wicked because they are complex, because the complication of problems is simple. It's normal. The wicked problems are those who are contradictory inside, that they solving one problem within the system destroys another part of the system. These are wicked problems which designers need to understand. That's one side of that, bringing that serious purpose of design to the table, on the screen of our design. Another one is the awareness. Students need to be aware about that each and every design is an ontological design.
Yeah. And
by that I mean that designing anything, especially now, user experience design, for example.
Yeah.
Designing an interface for the application is not just an interface for the application. We are changing the behavior of a human being. The ontological design is, the definition of it is it changes humanity.
Yeah.
Basically. So we have numerous examples of it, how it happened before. History gives us phenomenal samples of that, including the reading experience, which we call here RX. Reading experience is the acquired experience. It's acquired behavior of humans. We were not born to read. We learn to read because of writing. So there's an amazing scientist, cognitive psychologist here in Boston, Professor Marianne Wolf from Tufts University. She wrote a few books about the process of reading and how reading changed from deep reading, where the exploration of text brings the reader into the areas beyond of what author wanted or intended, to the wisdom of their own and so on, as opposed to skimming of text messages and cherry picking some words and responding to that. So there's one of the examples of shaping a behavior which changed humanity. Of course, an application might not change the humanity, but the scaling up the social media, for example, we know the result of it. Today, this is a new behavior of digital natives.
Yeah.
That's another important element of awareness, I think, of you current designers, that the design is as ontological design, that I really would like to, my intention was always to deflate the arrogance of designers. Then they design a product, and when you click here, you save the world. These are not my metaphor. This was Yevgeny Morozov, but he brilliantly put it into his criticism that it's not as simple. So there is obviously the element of how students will define themselves, their work, how they will evaluate themselves, not how we educators evaluate them, but how they evaluate their work. So designers very often define themselves by their skills. Practicing their skills is a path of excellence. Obviously, we spoke about musicians, right? That's a typical example. With design is the same. The path of mastering the skills toward excellence. But some designers define themselves as problem solvers and solving problems, make it a contribution to the world. And this is how they define themselves. Did they make a contribution to the world? Even if it's very small, relatively small problems on the scale of humanity, designers, problem-solving designers can define themselves based on. But the most important thing, and again, I'm sorry to bring those big guns, there's also a question, should designers accept the world as it is or not? And of course, they come to the profession to change the world, to make it a better place. If I really think that designers need to recognize the questions and issues which in the world, which bother them.
Yeah.
And then try to find the solution.
Yeah.
Or to do something about it. And sometimes those things are not in the core of design. They are somewhere else. There is an issue of big words, injustice, responsibility, moral wrong and right. We observe it every day. And designers need to have a special ear for that, because maybe there is a chance that they will be able to do something about it. And so I always say, do whatever you want to do, but you have to understand that design and art are not merely exist because they are interesting and visually pleasing. They are meant to ask difficult questions as well.
Yes.
And philosophical questions. Even if the audience, even if the users do not have an idea that they are dealing with philosophical questions, because it's not the point to name them like that. But they are confronted with some important elements which will help them to live their lives. This brings me back to this idea that designers should not be interested, all creative people, should not be interested in what they already know. They need to find a way for the journey to discover, to this aha
Absolutely.
moment, this amazing moment we talked about some time ago.
Absolutely. On that note, so do you think that lenience on data, so contemporary data culture, reliance on data, prioritizes speed and spectacle over understanding in our field?
Right. That's a very difficult question, as you know. Yes, data visualization as a sub-discipline of design and science. I mean, we help
data in general, yeah, of course, not just visualization. Yeah,
so this is an intellectual tool to figure out the world. But there is a danger, even at this very moment, there's a danger, because our students can produce an amazing data visualizations. They have tools, they have imagination and skills that very often that data visualization product looks so beautiful and so convincing that it looks like a scientific proof. Truth and nothing but the truth. But it is not. It is not. It is an argument.
Yeah.
The maps, diagrams, charts are as authorial as poetry.
Yeah, of course, absolutely.
And they always carry the intention. And that's why we need to discuss it with our students. Now, there are more philosophical questions about that. I don't know how data visualization will change our understanding of the world, but the understanding is not exactly the same as data. There is a progression in data. There is data, which is everywhere. Anything can be data. There is information, which is the data can be connected to larger structure in our brain, which is knowledge. And then there is another step is wisdom. So there's not simplicity here. And perhaps data visualization and data analysis can help that process of converting data into information and new knowledge, but it's not automatic and it's not given. Yeah. And it's not, the truth is not guaranteed at the end.
Of course.
And, that's why I think that future designers, as previous generation of designers, have to be creative and inventive, of course. They need to use all the available instruments and tools. Although we can talk about AGI if you want in a moment, but back to disciplined, research-oriented practice of design requires this critical thinking all the time, data-driven or not.
Yeah.
And there's always the qualities of rigor of thinking, which brings to the table the point that design is never a single solution. It's always a system. It's never definitive. It's always in progress. We change that. The world changes, like science changes. Everything changes. That's another element of motion in a completely different scale. But the designers need to respect that, as they need to respect the ethics. The problem with ethics is that we cannot say to designers, okay, let's behave ethically. Okay, done. Let's move to Photoshop. It's much more complex than that. But we cannot escape of those.
That's very interesting. To bring you back to education, you've actually lectured across Europe, Asia, Australia, and the Americas. What cultural differences mostly affect how students understand design and generally differences in teaching in these areas?
You did the same. Your CV is a combination of so many different places. Yes. So you probably have similar or different experiences, but I really think that there is no difference in creativity or in creative approach in a culture. It's sometimes the language of expression is different. Teaching in Japan was different for me than teaching in China or Korea. But the approach, the creativity, the intention, and the seriousness of being in the process of learning themselves, students discovering what they don't know, it's universal.
Yes.
I think. I don't know what's your observation. I have a different observation about the methodology and even professional approach to learning while I was teaching different groups in different countries, depending on the level, whether it's the doctoral students and master students and undergraduates. So that these are obviously different, but the same. My observation is they're sort of universal. There may be slightly different logistical differences in methodology, but I was always surprised about, depth of experience and acquired knowledge of some of the cultures. Like,
absolutely.
I was lucky to be doing lectures and workshops at Tsinghua University in Beijing, which is, sort of very prestigious. I probably had never had a chance to work with so well-educated young creative people at that group. That small group of 50 students, which in the scale of China is a very small group.
Absolutely.
But it was just sheer pleasure of learning from them and seeing completely different way of knowledge components they were bringing to solving design problems. It was amazing. I really enjoyed teaching internationally, and I really think that some educational institutions, not necessarily MassArt, but the one I mentioned, Tsinghua, I'm in contact with the Polish American Academy of Information Technology in Warsaw. They are institutions based on short, intensive workshops. So curriculum is slightly different.
Yeah.
And I enjoyed that kind of model.
Absolutely.
It supports the idea of quicker exchange of knowledge and experiences, which supports the idea of multidisciplinarity and other elements. So very focused, deep, intensive courses on specific ideas. That is what those students have a lot of fun, I think.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. When you reflect on decades of teaching, what gives you the greatest sense of continuity?
The greatest sense of continuity is that it's being continued. I think that I'm very proud of my own alumni who ended up in academia and in design teaching. I truly mean that. It's more or less 50% of Dynamic Media Institute when I was chair, first 15 years. It was more or less 50% went to the academic path. And they are very successful. That is important, that the best people should go there. Those intellectuals who probed the broader questions, philosophical questions, which sometimes in the domain of everyday practice of design, we don't have time to discuss that in a studio.
Yeah.
These are the lights of hope for the continuity. But I can say that I see it. I see it in young generation of design educators.
That's wonderful. So what ideas do you hope your students carry forward long after their education?
Well, wasn't it enough what I said already?
Yes.
Well, the process of discovery doesn't end with formal education.
Exactly.
Right? And we very often, design educators often ask themselves and try to find this best philosophical gem, how to inspire students, to learn and to keep learning. One thing is that they have no choice. Designers have no choice. They have to learn every day in their professional practice as well. Because the world changes, because there are new challenges. But there is an individual, personal level of it. Curiosity is what is not only genetic. That can be also learned. Design educators very often use that. I use that in my practice. I'm trying to show my students how fun it is to have curiosity. And if you transplant that idea into the individual brain of a designer, of your student, and they will take it for life. They will take this curiosity, which will keep asking them internal questions, big or small, about what to do next, how to make this world a better place.
Absolutely. So to touch upon AI, do you see AI as extending the language of dynamic media or kind of flattening it or kind of sort of?
I hope I didn't enforce that topic on you.
No, it's very interested. Of course, it's a very important topic.
In fact, right now, I think that I accept AI. Let me define AI. This is not AGI yet.
Yes, of
and
course.
It's not going to happen with LLMs, large language models. This is sort of one of the kind way of dealing with that neural network. Yes, but real AGI. For real AGI, we will have to return to symbolic-based engines and other concepts. I accept that as a tool of research. In fact, one of my most interesting courses I taught in my life was the courses outside of design discipline, outside of design department. All designers took them, but it was in social science department, the course entitled Technology and Language, which was sort of a viewpoint from the history of technology of communication into the way communication happens in society. So during that course, the AI started at MassArt, and we didn't have yet a policy of how to deal with it. Can we allow students to do that? So there was no official MassArt academic policy for that, but in my syllabus, I already said that to students, you can use AI in your paper, in your research, certainly, in your paper even, but you have to credit which part is created by AI. Like you would credit which part is created when you are trying to take the thought from a thinker to your paper. So I don't see a problem here whatsoever. I'm afraid can be used as a replacement of certain elements of design process. I see it among my colleagues from illustration departments. They are really concerned about that there's an ability of conversion manipulation. There's a beauty of language which LLMs explore with good results, but I'm not concerned about that. However, I want my students and the designers to be skeptical. Be skeptical about that because, as I said, we don't know yet the final results of that technology. But if you look into history of major technological breakthroughs in humanity, I'm not talking about digital technology. I'm talking about, the idea of counting time, all right, which was used by monks at some point, and then it changed our world completely because we had to synchronize to a millisecond. So very often, or I would say almost always, the inventors of technologies do not predict the outcomes of that technology because it takes time, sometimes decades, sometimes centuries, to see that. Of course, times accelerate, so can see what happened to the attention span, for example, because of social media. We can actually make informed research and conclusions about that. We have no idea. We have no even speculative concepts of what's going to happen with AGI. I do not believe in singularity of Kurzweil. These are things which are currently buzzwords for better fundraising or whatever. But I'm skeptical about new technologies which cannot be clearly mapped for the verdict whether it's going to be an advantage or disadvantage of humanity. It will take time. We can say only one thing. We live in a very interesting period of time that we are approaching this moment of AI, which Harari calls alien intelligence, because these are agents which are not biological agents. And yes, there are some conundra which we can discuss. I think that the paradox of Phaedrus, as you know, in Plato's Phaedrus, Socrates tells the story about writing, and he decries writing. But we know about writing. We know about this dialogue because of writing. So there's a paradox. So we have currently a new paradox, a new conundrum, which we don't know what's going to happen. Yeah. Because currently, at this moment, today, we can fairly assume that majority of so-called literary content, which is a just ugly word for human civilization. So this literal content on the internet is human. It's produced by human. But let's assume that LLMs will eat all of that, which they are doing. And they will spill their text in the amount of what human produced in their whole civilization. And then 10 times more than that. And this becomes a new food for LLMs and other generations of what's going to happen with it. That's the second paradox of Phaedrus, in my opinion. This is like a beautiful metaphor of Jorge Luis Borges' Library of Babel on steroids. Something went wrong with Library of Babel, which included all text human produced in all scripts. What's going to happen if the human production of that library is only 1%? We don't know yet, and we will not know that for some time. But these are at least things which need to show to our students, to sort of reflect their enthusiasm.
Absolutely. That's really wonderful. Finally, what questions or anything about design education do you think we're still not brave enough to ask? Or what do we need to change? Or if we could change anything magically, or any proposals that you have?
I would like to return to this idea of anti-disciplinarity or interdisciplinary or cross-disciplinarity, whatever you want to call. I really believe that design education, since we have to throw so much onto our students, so much technology, so much new knowledge, sometimes we think that our design students will be sort of quasi-programmers and they will do this and that. And all of a sudden, we don't have time to see the bigger picture. And the bigger picture is the design is the part of humanity. Is the part of life of billions of people on Earth, which do have access or don't have access to this or that. And it's a system of bigger interdependencies, which no single discipline will solve. And design has this chance to bring those things together, to mix, to merge, to spoil, perhaps, the amazing isolation of some disciplines lived in. This is what I think designers need to, and design educators need to be more vigilant about. Mm-hmm. Personally, can't believe that the concept of university, as launched in Bologna in the 11th century, still survives.
Or does it?
Right? I hope that those questions of design education will explode that.
I think we had a break when we modularized. I think the big problem began with modularization, which is something that, because what I find is the biggest challenge is that the new students now don't understand the concept of the studio, don't understand the unification of all the modules. They look at, we give them this module, we give them this module, we give them this module, but they don't understand that we're actually talking about the same thing. And I'm really trying to bring this into my teaching, but modularization created a break with our tradition, and we need to really talk about all that for me.
Right. No, I absolutely agree. I think that the general idea of education, not only design education, maybe design education becomes a laboratory for a bigger picture. But I think that the idea of the universal idea of education needs to be modified, let's say. Well,
Jan, thank you so much.
Thank you.
I really enjoyed the conversation with you, and keep in touch, of course, all the work. Yeah. Take care.
Thank you very much, Lefteris. I enjoyed the conversation as well. Thank you. Bye-bye.